Thanks for downloading our podcast today. We hope it helps and encourages you. You are very welcome to join us any Sunday at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. at our church home at 11 Bruce Street, Belfast. Check out our website at www.lifechurchbelfast.com for more details.
Well, I'm really excited actually to bring this message to you because I always know God's up to something whenever what was planned to be for this month, as you can plan ahead, and Owen and the team plan ahead as to what they're going to speak about. And, you know, I sat down to prepare, and I took like writer's block as I sat to prepare at home, and I thought, well, you know what, I'm going to just ditch it. I'm going to walk away from this and leave it because surely it should come a bit more simpler than that. And so what I did was I left it, and a couple of days later, I was driving home from work, and I'd stopped at a red light. And it was at the red light, and I know Anne talked about this morning, she heard a voice. It wasn't her own voice, it was something that she wasn't used to hearing. Well, like that, I'm at the traffic lights, and I hear God saying to me, Ursula, you need to talk about the waiting room. And it just absolutely landed right into my spirit, and I went home and I started to put pen to paper, and I started to write, and it just absolutely flowed. So I know that it is for some of you here tonight. I know that this message is for you, and I know that last week as Owen got up to speak, he spoke about being anxious about nothing. And this kind of follows on from that. Have you ever felt like your life is in the waiting room? You're waiting on something to happen, and it's not happening. And you feel like you've been praying about it, and there's just absolutely no movement. You feel sometimes that heaven is silent, and you just can't understand it. And Paul and I, my husband and I, have actually been experiencing this particular issue for the last 18 months. We feel like we have actually been in this waiting room that I'm going to talk to you about. I don't know what it is that you're waiting on, and it could be a decision that is potentially life-changing for you. I don't know if you're waiting for a miracle to happen, or you're waiting for grace for a situation, or you're waiting for power, or you're waiting for faith, or you're waiting on favor. There may be some of you actually in here who are waiting in a circumstance that you're actually waiting on the Red Sea parting because you can't see another way through. And that only God is going to bring you through that situation. You might be actually waiting on your healing. You may have had some bloods taken recently and you're waiting results. I don't know what it is for you. You know what it is, and you've been praying about it. You've been going to God over it. And that's what I want to talk to you about. I want you to take a look at the picture that's on the screen. And it depicts 3 chairs in a waiting area. For me, when I looked at this picture, what it actually depicted for me was that it's not your turn yet. That's what I see. I don't know what you see when you look at that picture, but for me it was, it's not your turn yet. And psychologists have actually written books on this very subject, and I was doing a little bit of research about what it's like for someone who's actually waiting. And the interesting point is that the actual time we're waiting may have little to do with how long the wait actually feels. So I'm going to have a wee bit of fun with you because I know that this is something probably you could all identify with. So this psychologist said that unoccupied time feels longer than occupied time. So an example is, have you ever gone into a hotel elevator? In America, that is an elevator. In Northern Ireland, it's a lift. Have you ever gone into the lift and it's got glass mirrors all around and you're the only one in it? Okay, what do? Yeah, fix your hair. Go right up. Squeeze the fat. No, come on. Check your teeth. We've all done it, yeah? It's an illusion because what they're actually doing is they're trying to occupy your time. It's a distraction. So the next time you get into a lift, think about that. You're actually being distracted. They're trying to cause this illusion that they want to occupy your time. When you go into a restaurant, right, we have this thing, and I think it's worldwide. I don't think it's just Northern Irish. But people want to get started. Yeah, you're mad keen to get at it, as they say. Yeah. So you go into a restaurant, and you sit down, and they come with the menu. Well, you see, again, that's an illusion, because all they're wanting to do is to make you believe that, well, you've started. We're here. There's the menu. And they don't come back for another half an hour, and you're sitting going, for goodness sake, how long does it take? Again, that is an illusion, because people want to get started. Anxiety makes the wait seem longer. Yeah, we've all experienced that, especially if you're like me, and you're in the dentist's waiting room. Like this, you're sitting in the dentist's waiting room. Well, my anxiety levels start to rise, and I can feel it. Physiological, I can feel it, and it's rising. Except if you're sitting in John Black's waiting room. John Black is one of the members of our church here, and he's a dentist. Well, I've had a few bad experiences waiting in the dentist. One that involved being rushed into A&E. Now, when you have that sort of experience, your anxiety levels can rise. But if you have a dentist like John Black, yeah, he's reinstated my faith in dentists, and I can cope with it. I can sit in the waiting room and actually cope with it. So your anxiety levels can rise as you're sitting waiting. Uncertain waits are longer than known definite waits. So an example of that is if you go in to the doctor's surgery and you head up to reception and they say, Mrs. Ferguson, have a seat. It'll be 30 minutes. Right. Okay, I can do that. So I take a seat and I lift the magazines and flick through, and, I'm quite happy, quite settled. 1 minute past 30 minutes and I'm starting to get a little irritable. 2 minutes passed and you're going, what is the health service like? This is ridiculous. 3 minutes and everything goes out the window. It's like that now they're having a laugh. You've all experienced it. You've all been there. So we will wait calmly when we're told there's a definite time to your wait. Yeah. But when you haven't got a notion when you're going to be taken, you start to become anxious and irritable. Yeah? Okay, so unexplained waits are longer than explained waits. Right. So who's ever ordered a pizza and it's frosty outside on the roads? So, you give them a wee bit of leeway. You say to yourself, all right, I can cope. The roads out there are kind of bad, so we'll give this guy a bit of time. Not unless, obviously, you live in the hills of Dromara like ourselves, and it's a 2-hour round trip for a Chinese delivery. So we just don't even go there. So unexplained waits are longer. If you've got an explanation, if that pizza man comes and says, do you know what, those roads are hectic, I've heard that, then all's forgiven. Unfair waits are longer than equitable waits. Now, I've had this experience recently in London when I was waiting for the tube train, on the platform. Well, there's none of this first in line rule. It's a free-for-all, right? And your anxiety levels start to rise because there's absolutely no order to it. And the people just flock onto the platform, and you're waiting to get in, and your anxiety levels are rising, especially if you're that one who's just skimmed in through the door at the last, and you're hoping that the door's going to shut behind you. Have you ever been in that situation? Well, recently in London, I was in that situation, and it freaked me out, because not only couldn't understand the tube map, never mind anything else, but that was all just a bit much. So unfair waits are longer than equitable waits. So the more value that you put on a service, the longer the customer will wait. Now, I'm sure you've had this experience. But an example of that would be if you were to go in to buy an iPad versus a toothbrush. Which shop are you going to stand in a bit longer? You're going to stand in the one, all right. So you take care of your teeth then, Trevor. I think you'll potentially wait a bit longer. And solo waits, this is one of my favorite ones. Solo waits feel longer than group waits. All right, I've had this experience. First time that Garth Brooks came to Dublin. You all know who Garth Brooks is, come on. You all know who he is, yeah? Yeah, good. All right, just test. All right, so Garth Brooks comes to Dublin and we pack up and sit for the whole day on the footpath. And we start to meet and greet people in the queue, and they're all lining up the streets, and we are very, very happy people because we're right at the top of the queue. And we are quite happy in the crowd to be singing, I've got friends in low places. Right? So, when you can do that with a crowd of like-minded people, it doesn't matter how long you're going to wait. Yeah? But if you were standing there on your own, singing, I've got friends, then you're going to look ridiculous. So I know I'm having a bit of fun with you, but that's what the psychologists will talk about when they talk about waiting, okay? But for some of you, I know that this wait that the waiting room that you're in is potentially a very serious life changer for you. And I know that even for ourselves, in the last 18 months, Paul and I have been in this waiting room. And our waiting room has been around our business, and Paul's in the building trade, and as you know, the economic climate in Northern Ireland has been very difficult, and so, we've been forced almost into this waiting room. And this is where this message has really come from, because it's come from a personal journey of us being in this room. And, whilst that's one area of our lives that has been affected, it has a ripple effect, and it starts to impact in other areas of your life. Okay, so I know that we're waiting in this room, and it's got to do with our finances, but I do know how this potentially has an impact on all areas of our lives. And here's some of the points that I want to share with you. This is something that we've picked up whilst we've been in this waiting room. And I'm not going to tell you that this has been an easy wait. And we're still waiting. The wait's not over, and we're still there. But I want to share some of our experience with you, and hopefully that you can take something away and be encouraged. So here are some of the pointers. And if you're taking notes, the first point is this, that God does not change. So we may be sitting in this waiting room for however length of time, but God doesn't change. You see, we need to trust in God who knows us and knows when we are ready for the answer for which we have been waiting. Now, here is a promise for you, and I really want you to take this one down because it's been really significant for us. And it's in James 1, verse 17, and it says this, every good and perfect gift is from above, coming down from the Father of lights, with whom there is no variation or shadow due to change. So God is an unchanging God. He doesn't change. This means that we should not question or doubt his love and his goodness toward us. Okay? So when these difficulties come and the temptations come, which they will do, we need to remember that God doesn't change. And one of the things that we have learned is that the Father does not want to hold out on you. He's not holding out on you.
Yeah, that's good.
That's what the enemy wants you to think. Okay, so this is one of the enemy's tricks. And he will try to convince us that the Father is holding out on us and that he really doesn't love you or care about you. But here's some examples from the Bible. When Satan approached Eve, he suggested that if God really loved her, he'd permit her to eat the forbidden fruit. So this was Satan's bait. And when Satan tempted Jesus, he raised the question of hunger, and he said, if your Father loves you, why are you still hungry? Don't take the bait. Because once we start to doubt God's goodness in our lives, we'll be attracted to that enemy's offer. Okay? And then we'll try to reach out for that bait because we'll start to believe. We'll start to believe that God is holding out on us. But God's gifts to us are always better than any bargaining that the enemy's going to do. So point number 2 is this. God does not change. And I haven't made a mistake. It's the same as point number 1. But point number 2 is that God does not change, but our perception of him can. Our perception of him can. So in the natural, we can become anxious in our weight. And that in itself can cloud our thinking. And that's what Owen was talking to you about last week, about being anxious about nothing. Now, I know in church we've spoke about this person before, but Dr. Caroline Leaf, she is a cognitive neuroscientist. Now, what that really means is she knows what she's talking about. If you haven't Googled Dr. Caroline Leaf, then I would suggest that you do, because she's an absolute wealth of information. And actually, whenever I was researching this message, I came across something that Caroline said, and I want to share it with you because I think it's going to help. But she talks about, in terms of anxiety clouding our thinking, that there are 2 groups of emotions that are polar opposites, okay? So we've got positive, faith-based emotions, and then we've got negative, fear-based emotions. So we've got positive, faith-based emotions, and then we've got the negative, fear-based emotions. Now, Dr. Caroline Leaf, as I told you, is a cognitive neuroscientist. So she actually gives you the science behind this thought. And that is this. So each of these feelings, each of these emotions, has its own set of molecules. And that performs as spiritual forces with chemicals and electrical representation within your body. Okay? So the faith-based emotions are love, joy, peace, kindness, gentleness, self-control, forgiveness, and patience. So these produce good attitudes and thoughts. And then we've got the fear-based emotions, and they include hate, anxiety, anger, hostility, resentment, frustration, impatience, and irritation. So that's something that we've been talking about. And these produce the toxic attitudes within. And that actually has a chemical reaction within your body. And that can then alter your behavior. But this is what the truth, the Word of God says, that fear is the root of stress. But Scripture says this: God has not given us a spirit of fear, but of power and love and of a sound mind. And that is in 2 Timothy 1:7. See, these fear-based thinking blocks, it blocks that flow of healthy chemicals, and it releases toxic chemicals into your body and puts you into stress. So when your thoughts start to move into stress, your emotions attempt to rule. Okay, so there's a battle going on within you, and the emotions attempt to rule. And these emotional perceptions are designed to create this alertness. And that is to guide you, but not rule you. Now, this is where it really gets important. Because all of this is going on, and our anxiety levels are raised, and what actually happens is this, that we begin to misinterpret the truth. So as our anxiety levels are raised, we start to misinterpret truth. So when we're anxious or stressed, our emotions tend to rule, and the truth is misinterpreted. Now, I want to give you an example from the Bible as to what happened to Abraham. So Abraham is known as the father of many nations. But, you know, he went through his own struggles. When God called him, God made some powerful promises to Abraham. And they are recorded in Genesis 12, verses 1 to 3. And it says this: Now the Lord said to Abram, "Go for yourself away from your country, from your relatives and from your father's house to the land that I will show you. And I will make you a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name famous and distinguished, and you will be a blessing. So that's the promise of God to Abram. But then what happens? Abram finally, he arrives in Canaan's land, and what does he encounter? He encounters a drought. Okay, now, this is what happens. We get a promise, and then circumstances come. Yeah. And we hit a drought. This is what's happened for Paul and I. We've hit a drought. The drought hasn't been something that we've created ourselves. It's been to do with the economic climate, but we've got caught up in it. And so everything starts to go wrong for Abram, and he starts to question the viability of God's promise to protect and bless him. So when there was such a drought in the land, he couldn't stay, and he decides to go to Egypt. And he starts to doubt, and he starts to question God's promises. And then as a result, Abram takes things into his own hands. How many times have we done that? When you start to take matters into your own hands, and you take your eye off God, and you take your eye off the promise that he has given you, and we get distracted. Yeah. So he decides to go to he decides to go to Egypt, and everything kind of spirals downward. Sarah was absolutely beautiful, his wife, and when he went to Egypt, he said, pretend you're my sister, because they'll kill us. And Pharaoh sees her, and he wants to marry her, and Abram allows this to happen. What happens to you when you hit a drought, or when you're starting to feel anxious, or when you start to see that things aren't necessarily going as they were planned? How do you respond when this drought comes? So you've heard the promises of God for your life, but you're left waiting, feeling really impatient, irritable. You don't know what to do. So why didn't God keep the severe drought from happening? Well, we're not told why God allowed the drought to happen, but what we are told is that it happened, and then we see Abram's lack of faith and the outcomes from his choices. See, God doesn't live up to our time frame, and you might be expecting God to move within your time frame, but he doesn't do it. And then impatience can lead us to take things into our own hands. And I love this example. We've got this vending machine in work. Oh dear, and I'm sitting and when things get tight in the office, I'm like, vending machine. There's got to be something in there. Yeah, and we always know when the vending machine man comes and he stocks it up again. But God doesn't work like a vending machine where you punch in the code and right away your treat drops and you pray and you say, God, by this time tomorrow, I'm going to have my answer. Punch in and put your hand in, and yeah, I've got it. No, God doesn't work like that. Nor does he work like, Federal Express, where you put your order in and you got it within 24 hours. Yeah. It doesn't happen like that. Right. So don't be putting God on the spot and asking him to sort it all out within your time frame. But the story doesn't end there for Abram, because here's what happens. Even in his disobedience, God still made a way for him. You see, even in yours, even if you take your eye off the ball and you take matters in your own hands, God still will make a way back. Right. Psalm 139 tells us that we can never actually get away from his presence. We can try and run and hide, but he is with us. And all of us are going to fail at some point, and we will. But look where God took Abram. He blessed him in all things, and he made him the father of many nations. Yeah. See, God doesn't change. Yeah. He's not holding out on you. Every good and perfect gift is from him. When you're in that waiting room, don't take the enemy's bait, because there's always going to be a way back, even after disappointment. And the next point is this. Be expectant, because God can suddenly move in your situation. Yeah. So I don't know what your situation is right now, but God can suddenly move. Now, I got really excited about reading this story because I read this as a kid, and I'm sure you all have too. But it's the story of Paul and Silas in Acts 16. And the Bible tells us about a crowd attacking Paul and Silas. And that the rulers tore off their clothes and commanded that they be beaten with rods with many blows. And then they're thrown in prison. But they're sitting in this prison all beaten up. And verse 24 tells us that the jailer, having received such a strict charge, put them in the inner prison, the dungeon. So he didn't just put them in the ordinary prison. He puts them right into the dungeon, which is further down in. And when they're in the dungeon, they actually put stocks around them. So holding their ankles, holding their arms, because they didn't want them to get out. We've got a beep going on here. We're all right. We're all good. Are we good? I don't want you to miss this. Because this is good. This is good. This bit is good. So Paul and Silas, right, so they're not in the ordinary prison. They're down in the dungeon. Now, in your life, you might be thinking, I am absolutely trapped in my circumstances. I've got stocks around my ankles, around my wrists, and I'm not getting out of here anytime soon. There's no way out. But then, about midnight strikes, and God shows up. Verse 25 and 6 recount, but then about midnight, as Paul and Silas were praying, and they were singing hymns and praises to God. Right? Picture it. They're in the worst situation that you could find yourself in. And they have absolutely no time frame for release. And they're singing praises and hymns to God. And not only that, they're lifting the level for themselves, but the others hear them. The other prisoners hear them. The jailer hears them. Even in their darkest hour, no indication of getting out, they're singing hymns to God. Now, what do people hear out of your mouth when you're waiting for something? Good. Do they hear, good, woe is me? Or in Northern Ireland, what we say, isn't it desperate? Isn't this is awful? This is desperate. Or do they actually hear songs of thanksgiving where you find yourself in a situation and you go, well, praise God, I'm getting out of this one. Yeah. My answer is waiting on me. I don't see it, but I don't need to see it to believe it. Yeah. That's what you need to be saying, because what happened here was Paul and Silas not only lifted the atmosphere in their own circumstances by praising God, but it actually impacted the jailer. Yeah. He heard them. You know, there's people that are looking at you in your circumstance in your waiting room, and they're looking on. And you don't even realize they're looking on in your circumstance. And they're saying to you, how do they do it? How are they keeping it together? And you see, that's where the supernatural joy comes in. Because nothing in the natural will be making you sing hymns and praises to God when you are trapped. Yeah. It's the supernatural love of God that's coming in. And actually what happens is the jailer ends up giving his life to Christ. Yeah. You have an opportunity within your waiting room to impact on people. You mightn't see it. You might be so caught up in your own set of circumstances and you don't see it. But God used that situation. And the final point that I want to bring to you is this. Refuse to give up on your dreams. Because, God has given you a promise. And for some of you, it might have happened years ago, and you're not actually seeing it happen. And we can go through all the natural emotions of anxiety and irritation and, I must have heard that wrong, and, oh dear, what am I going to do? And we can go, woe is me. But then a great example of that is Joseph. And Joseph, his brothers sold him as a slave in Genesis 37. And though he did not understand all that was happening to him, he trusted God to work out his plan in his time. So he trusted in God. He waited for God to fulfill his promise that Joseph would become a great leader. And he had to have the patience to believe God. But he probably wondered where God was when he was sitting in the prison cell. But here's the really exciting thing about Joseph, is that he went from a pit to a prison to a palace. Yeah. Right? Pit to prison to palace. It took 13 years for Joseph to realize his dream. 13 years. Joseph didn't sit back and say, woe was me. Probably felt like that a whole lot of times, mind you. But he did everything unto God with faithful heart. And that's what God is asking you to do, to be faithful, to look to him in your circumstances. And for Joseph, you know, his in the natural, his crutches were removed. Like his family, I mean, they didn't want him. And I don't know what your situation is, but, you know, crutches can be removed. And when I'm talking about crutches, it can be the things that hold us up in the physical. Not yours, Sharon. Don't you leave go of your crutches yet. But in the natural, you know, we all have crutches, dependencies. But God is wanting you to focus on him. He is wanting you to focus on him. So in the wait, you might feel like your dreams are dying or slowly slipping away. But I want to encourage you, don't give up on them. Don't give up on what God has promised for you in your waiting room. And I want to finish with this truth. Ecclesiastes 3 verse 11 says this, that he has made everything beautiful in his time. Everything. Timing is important. I'm just going to get the band back up again. Timing really, really is important. But the secret to peace while you're in this waiting room is to discover and accept and appreciate God's perfect timing. Yeah. He's not holding out. Don't let the enemy draw you in and take that bait. Don't let him do it. Hold on to your dream because it'll come. It's going to happen for you. My husband and I are still sitting in these chairs, right? We're still there. And whilst that at the beginning I said that it reminds me of a picture of it's not your turn. But it's not our turn yet. But our time's coming. Yeah. And we will see through this journey. You will see through your journey. Right. God has you. He's never let go. Yeah. Keep believing and keep dreaming. Yeah. And keep trusting and remain faithful.
Thanks for downloading our podcast today. We hope it helps and encourages you. You are very welcome to join us any Sunday at 11 a.m. and 6 p.m. at our church home at 11 Bruce Street, Belfast. Check out our website at www.lifechurchbelfast.com for more details.